Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we have somebody on the show today who's going to tap into your weirdness and give you some things that are going to help you to be more innovative, creative, and a better leader. Amy Posey was born and raised in Oak Lawn, Illinois, 6 blocks from the south side of Chicago's city limits. Her most vivid memories include stuffing the family into a very tiny hatchback and taking road trips east of the Mississippi, which inspired her love of travel and adventure. The youngest of 4 children, she has an older brother and sister, and her oldest sister died due to complications from leukemia when Amy was 17, 1 month after starting college. It had an undeniable impact on her outlook on life and realization to live life to its fullest. She was the first in her family to attend college at Purdue University, where she started out as an aviation technology major with hopes of entering an aviation career, but shifted gears after her first year to eventually graduate as an English major with a focus on poetry. While at Purdue, she met her husband of 22 years, Bob, who happens to be a pilot, peripherally fulfilling her interest in aviation and giving her the chance to travel to over 70 countries. After university, Amy pursued work in teaching high school English, and after 3 years of teaching, transitioned to management consulting for public sector clients, which sparked her interest in business. After September 11th, 2001, a downturn in the aviation market sent her and Bob packing for the Middle East, where she spent 3 years living and working in the Kingdom of Bahrain while pursuing her MBA, making her also the first in her family to attend graduate school. When she returned from the Middle East, she resumed her consulting career, but based in Silicon Valley, and focused on technology companies, which has been her focus for the last 15 years of her career. A decade ago, she transitioned from a large management consulting firm to working for a boutique firm called AIP Group, Adventures Inspiring Performance, where she facilitated adventure-based leadership sessions and earned her executive master's in the neuroscience of leadership. Her last year with AIP was spent leading the company as CEO before she left to launch her own neuroscience-based management development startup called Super Mega Boss in 2019, and co-wrote Wild Success, 7 key lessons business leaders can learn from extreme adventurers with Kevin Vallely, who's been on the Fast Leader Show and who's episode 279, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Amy currently lives in San Jose, California, with her husband, Bob, and their 22-year-old cat. Amy Posey, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm ready. I am ready. Let's do this.
Oh, I'm glad you're here, and I've given my Legion a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Yeah, that last piece around manager training. So just dealing with and thinking about how leaders learn, develop, and grow has been, I've been working in it and with leaders for a long time. And so I noticed a space where particularly new leaders and managers, they're not learning in the way that you and I may have learned to lead other humans. And I feel like there's a shift in what they're consuming outside of work. And so what I'm doing is kind of this grand experiment. So Super Mega Boss, which is the company I'm running now, essentially looks at the weirdness of learning to lead others, because that in and of itself is really weird sometimes. And so I'm taking a lot of the science that I've thought about and developed a way to have people learn in kind of more interesting and weird ways, because we remember it better when it's weird. We remember things that spark our emotions. And weirdness and novelty is one of those things that kind of sticks in our brain. And so I'm developing a new way for people to think about how do they manage others? How do they manage themselves as a boss and a leader? So I'm spending a lot of time creating really fun content, doing different experiments based in the science and based in, frankly, I'm a bit of a weirdo myself. And so I'm combining those things, and it's a cool experiment that seems to be sticking. So I've been doing that for the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, which has been a lot of fun.
Well, and as listening to you, talk about that, I start thinking about the book Wild Success that you co-wrote with Kevin Bellally. And I think it's really important to talk in regards to foundational elements and the awareness of foundational elements, and then where you're going with all of this in regards to the neuroscience. So in the book, you talk about 7 key lessons that leaders can learn from extreme adventurers, and they are cognitive reappraisal, grit, growth mindset, purpose, innovation, resilience, and personal sustainability. So once we understand those foundational elements, and again, Kevin does an excellent job of explaining that on his episode on the Fast Leader Show. Again, it was episode 279, and we'll put a link to that on your show notes page. But what we're talking about is, okay, now how do we take all of these foundational components and elements, these ingredients, and then now really using it for that, big bad, that hyper extraordinary, type of scenario, so that we can separate ourselves from everyone else, because that's really what's required today.
It really is.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, and it's interesting because I think about, those fundamental elements that came out in the book, the science is there behind all of them too. So it's a cool adventure story. It's the science behind it. And this is just kind of taking the science and double clicking on it in a more tactical way. So Wild Success, I'm passionate about travel and adventure and the stories that come from that. I wanted to even go a little bit deeper and further in, thinking about those are sort of the emotional components of being a leader. I wanted to look at, okay, there's also tactics around being a manager, and those tactics are things that also require some understanding some of the science and how we operate and how to build habits around all of those sort of tactics. Because there's sort of the highfalutin, like, how do I approach leadership in that big sort of capital L space? And that's where Wild Success, I think, excels, because it kind of gets you thinking above your day to day. I also wanted to look at what is the day to day for a manager, and how are they learning and growing? And so particularly around the space of innovation, because you're supposed to not play favorites, but I gotta say, like, that part of the book is my favorite, because innovation is like my baby, and I've been thinking about it for so long. And part of it was double clicking and seeing, like, how do I take these leadership and management concepts and boil them down even further to the tactics and make those tactics stickier for people? Because unless you build those good habits in the foundation, all the research shows that most managers in their first 2 years, like 60% of them or so, don't do well because they don't develop those habits. And so it's like, how do you get into that? How do you unlock the potential to develop those habits? One is talking about it, but number two, I think, is talking about it not in sort of the capital L leader sort of way, but talking about it in a real tactical, habit forming, scientific experiment sort of way to make it a little bit more accessible. Because that, I always remember as a new manager, I was sort of terrified, like, oh God, I'm a leader now. Oh, yikes. So part of it is thinking about it in a more practical way.
And as you were saying that, I start thinking about the differentiation between, as a manager, what I have to do tactically. So, hey, we have to execute. We have to do these things. We have to follow these processes and procedures and workflows. And, that's one component, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is, how do we now apply the finesse to all of that and figure out maybe better ways of doing it, better ways of, leading the people in the process, not just managing all of the resources and all of that. And so you actually talk about, in a previous, presentation that I saw of yours, 5 ingredients that we need to implement in order to engineer better days. Part of this goes into being a better leader. It goes into serving the customers better and providing a better customer experience, employee experience. There's several different ways that you can do it. And you talk about pausing and revisiting, quiet, reframing, positivity, and then an extended revisit. Kind of walk us through what that means.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time with tech companies. I live in Silicon Valley. I'm a geek. I love to think about how do new ideas happen. And, what's the secret sauce? How are people learning to create these new ideas? Like, why are we all coming to this one place and looking at Silicon Valley as like the heart of it? And I started to uncover, like, there's some elements here that are working, but are they working in the way that we're sort of designed to come up with these ideas? So I went deep on research around the space, and that's where I came up with these ingredients, because what the science is saying, that in order to really come up with these ideas, you've got to be deliberate and intentional on how you work if you expect to come up with these new ideas. And there's tons of good, there's more and more good literature out than there was probably 5 years ago when I started studying it. But, part of it is thinking about those elements and how do you infuse every day with more of them, because we get into the sort of the control network in the brain, and we're always just sort of what's next, the tactics of our day getting managed by calendars. And this is an effort to get back into our default network, which is really where the brain network, where we do more of our innovative thinking. It's the daydreamy, sort of floaty space. And I always ask people, like, how much time do you actually schedule to daydream during the day? And people are like, 0 to negative. I'm like, yeah, I know. And part of it is you actually need that. And so the insight ingredients were things that I came up with to just remind people you actually have to engineer your day a little bit better if you expect to come up with the aha moments, because your brain needs that time and space. So pause, being able to walk away from things. And I've used these experiments even in writing Wild Success. I had to walk away to come up with, like, how do I tie all these different ideas together, from science, from business, from adventure? Like, that's a weird combination. How do you do that? And it required me to take pause. And so I'd go out and I'd take a walk in the hills. I'd go out and, even do a run around the block. But taking that pause and stepping away from the challenge that you have. I know so many people are trying to force fit it, get in a room, brainstorm for an hour, come up with the best idea. Like, spoiler, very rarely will that accomplish the best idea.
And
the next item was go ahead, Jim.
I'd actually like to add on that too a second, because what I have started implementing when I am having discussion and dialogue with somebody, and we do have to figure out, something different. What we're doing right now isn't working. People automatically want to go to start, actually solving the problem right away. So we talk about the different types of thinking that are needed, right? So we have the congruent, type of thinking, and then we have, the creative type of thinking. And so I have been more intentional to say, I don't want your answer right now. I just want you to think about it and come back to me tomorrow, or whatever the case may be. Because I want them to do what you're referring to, but you have to, you can't, it's not just doing it for yourself. You now have to do it for others, for you to get their better perspectives and ideas.
And that's a really key bit of it, is to recognize that, because people have been very, very habituated into, like, oh, we need a solution immediately. We're going so fast. And innovation doesn't have to happen in that speed. And often the best innovations take time and failure and all the, like, anything you look at in terms of the most innovative things that are out there, it wasn't an immediacy. And so I love the idea of just sending someone away, say, think about it. And I do that so often, and have trained myself to, because it's you want to solve people problems, you want to be helpful, there's a deep desire. And the most helpful thing you can do is be like, okay, I've got my information, I'm going to take a day or two to think about this, and then I'm going to get back to you with some ideas so that I can properly give this the attention it deserves. And I think the more people can do that and make the time and space to do that, it requires planning, which, I know a lot of people are not great at. And so it requires, like, you've got to build that time back in if you really do need to do that. And so pause, I think, is a really key piece of it. You got to slow down if you really want those answers to come. Another kind of interesting space in these ingredients is the idea of quiet, which is tough for a lot of people. The idea that your brain actually needs to not have as many sensory inputs when you're in the default sort of thinking time. And so the open floor plan that most people work in a lot of the corporations, especially here in Silicon Valley, people always come to me after I tell them they need quiet. They're like, but I work here, and how am I supposed to do that? I'm like, well, you can't do all of your work in the same space. And that's kind of a shocker for folks, but it's like these workplaces that we've designed, and right now it's all our homes. So it's actually really difficult if you're a homeschool parent and you're trying to get work done and the leaf blowers are out there. Like, it's hard to innovate unless you can turn off some of the sensory input. And one of the biggest sensory inputs is sound. And so in order to think deeply and do that deep work, you actually need quiet. But the tricky piece is you can actually also listen to nature sounds and trick your brain by, getting a pastoral, like birds chirping, maybe some rainfall, ocean. Your brain works better outside, sort of in motion, thinking about complicated things. But our workplaces are noisy. You're thinking about 1,000 things at once. You're usually stationary. And so part of it is that quiet space, like going out for a walk in nature, exposing yourself to greens and blues. That's where the magic is. That's where your brain is going to do its best, because that's sort of the natural soundtrack that your brain can kind of deal with. The mechanical soundtrack of always sort of having a playlist going, or it's really tough for your brain to come up with great ideas. So quiet and that reflection time to give yourself and just like stop some of that sensory input is also really important for your brain to start to combine all these ideas into the aha moment. Reframing. So the book actually talks about cognitive reappraisal, which is a kind of reframing, and that talks about it from a more emotional standpoint. This is more from how do I look at my challenge or problem differently? And what I tell people is you have to expose yourself to information and things that aren't in your domain in order to reframe. And that's hard for people. So when I tell people, okay, if you are a software engineer, go to an art museum, they go, wait, what? Like, that's not my thing. Like, I'm like, that's why you need to go do something. Read things that are not in your domain, expose yourself, have conversations even. And this is the smallest space that I think people can just sort of step out, go talk to somebody in another business function and ask them how they would solve your problem. Make friends across the organization, and you'll actually get way more innovative responses and approaches to your challenges. But we get stuck in our silos. We wait to see what's comfortable. Innovation's all about getting uncomfortable. So like reaching out, talking to people who are not in your domain, talking to them about your challenge in a way that they can understand it and get like brainstorm with them. That's, I think, a really important piece, and trying to apply different solutions and different approaches to how you want to think about that challenge. And I'm trying to do that myself in bringing in the people that I'm working with in Super Mega Boss. I'm talking to people who create music videos for artists and TikTok videos to infuse into very what would traditionally be considered dry business learning. Like, I've got to think about it in a different way. I've got artists, I've got people who aren't educators. It's a different lens. And so they can help you solve your problem in a very different way. So reframing it, getting different input, insight, I think is huge. Positivity. So we naturally are negatively wired. And that's a survival mechanism of our sort of 4 key emotions. 3 are negative. And so you've got to bring a spirit of positivity of challenges can be solved, and be optimistic, realistic, but optimistic when you face a challenge, that you can find an interesting, innovative solution. And that sort of hope kind of outweighs the immediacy of shutting down that voice in our head that before we even say what our crazy new idea is, like shuts it down. It's like, no, that's not good enough. That's never going to work. You got to shut that voice down. And I think a lot of people don't do that when they're trying to be truly innovative. They're like, oh, it's not going to work. I'm not even going to say it. I feel stupid. Like, no, shut that guy down. Like, get it out on paper, get it out on the whiteboard. That's huge. And then lastly, revisiting. So stepping away for a while, not just sort of like a pause and reconnect, but a longer term revisit of your challenge and the solution that you've come up with, because you've got a lot of cognitive bias. Once you come up with that great idea, you think it is the best idea in the history of humanity. And it's really important to come back and say, how might this fail? How else could I look at this? Like, is this the best solution possible? And trying to be objective and not biased, and revisiting it again I think is a great way to kind of relook at your ideas. And it's hard to put in practice because sometimes you have to get reminded like, hey, that was a great idea for point in time X, like have things change materially that make me need to look at this differently. And even if it just is an exercise in reaffirming your great idea, great, but it's always good to poke holes at it and continue to enhance, right? Like everything's always in beta. That's a real geeky way to look at it, but like everything can be improved, ourselves, our products, our ideas. And part of it is taking that as a growth opportunity to take a look at it. So those are the ingredients I feel like from a science standpoint, help us realize, oh, okay, I can take the process of coming up with new ways of doing things and apply a little bit of science and probably come up with a better idea than going at it in sort of my automatic, like get in a room, brainstorm it with some people, off we go with an idea.
Okay, so then we have to do a better job of separating out our divergent and convergent thinking. We have to make sure that we don't fall victim to biases of ourselves and others. And there's a whole cacophony of things that are just flying at us, right? But then you throw in this element with some of the work that you're doing in regards to weirdness and leadership development and why weirdness works. And I think that's why you talked about the TikTok, people and all this. How is all this coming to where you're going?
Yeah. So when I thought about, and I've been thinking about innovation for a while, and about a year and a half ago, when I was sort of like, okay, I need to pivot, like time for me to take a fresh approach on something, I started to dig into the land of the manager development space. And I just got really, personally bored. I kind of empathized and I put myself in the shoes of, if I'm a emerging leader and I've never been a boss before, how do I learn how to do this? And so that sort of design thinking approach to let me empathize with this group of humans and the world that we're in, and whatever space I might be in. I might be a software engineer, a new fresh marketeer, someone in manufacturing, like doesn't matter. Like let me just put myself, and I've got to lead a small team and I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. Are the things that are out there right now going to help me? And help me in a way that I'm going to take my very limited attention span, and it's shrinking. Is it as exciting and fun and interesting and useful as the stuff I'm looking at outside of work? And my answer was no, I'm going to go Google how to do my job, because the stuff I'm seeing just wasn't there. And so I started to think about, okay, I've been talking to leaders and humans for a long time about some of these things. Like, how does learning need to change and adapt? Like our media consumption is changing and adapting, and the way people are creating content and doing sort of, honestly, like weird, ridiculous things of humanity, which I think is fun to scroll through Instagram and find all the weirdness. But then I was like, oh, there's something here. Like, if this is so compelling, why can't the way we learn how to do our jobs have an element of this to make it more engaging and new and different? Because the brain loves novelty. We love looking at new stuff. It sparks our dopamine receptors. It gets us kind of like, oh, what is this? This is weird. And so I'm in the process of really establishing, like, why does weirdness work? And how does it work? And so Super Mega Boss, if you go on the website, it's funny because I bring it into people and I'm like, here's what I'm doing. And the looks on people's faces, they're like, what the heck is this? I'm like, perfect. That's the response I want. So I have this going in hypothesis that some weirdness is going to work, is going to stand out, is going to make people go, oh, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this. I'm going to figure out. We're still having those deep leadership conversations and manager conversations around what I like to call power skills, not soft skills, but power skills. Like, how do I communicate? How do I be emotionally intelligent in situations? How do I help people grow and develop? But we're doing it with this layer on top of it that makes it much more memorable. And so I'm essentially going off and doing an experiment, just like I would tell people from an innovation standpoint. Like I've given it some time to marinate, to think about it, and it's in beta, like it's in a permanent set of beta. And I'm getting feedback from people like, oh, I like this piece of it. This piece is a little too weird for me, because I tell people, like, it's not for everybody. If you're not ready for it, that's okay. And I know from cultural, like some of the different corporate cultures I work with, like it's not going to be where you want to go. Like it's just not your vibe, and that's cool. But part of me is like, where might this work? Because I think weirdness is sticky, and when you can apply weirdness in different domains, it just gives it a fresh light and makes people pay attention to it more. And so I'm basically experimenting with ways to create content that is based in science, based in creating great manager habits, but is something that's stickier for people to pay more attention to. Because we've got, I mean, at this point, we've got maybe 5 to 10 minutes of people's attention, like 8 minutes is the sweet spot. You can't put somebody in a one-day training session and just hammer content at them anymore. It just isn't going to work. And then how to have a long tail behind it. It's something that I think has to shift. And people are not, I mean, that's why micro-learning works. Like, people want to customize and personalize. And so I'm going to add that layer of weirdness and see how it goes from a disrupting the space perspective.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking about the differences that we need to point out. We're not talking about people learning how to, better use, an application. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is developing a competency that's a foundational component to them being able to have a skill. Okay, so that's a journey. I mean, that is something that requires what you're referring to, which is more of that neuroscience, habit forming, bias dejecting, separating of the whole divergent and convergent thinking. This is more complex to something that is going to be transformational in nature, not a practice or a tactical activity.
Absolutely. And that was a conscious choice on my effort, because I do feel like these are the competencies that people need for the long term. And those that you can develop a competency better over time with habit formation, reminders, triggers that allow you to respond in certain ways, and identifying the process and trigger. It's a nuanced art and science versus how to learn an application, right? Like, the brain learns differently. It's remembering how to behave in certain ways. And those behavior-based learnings are much harder to do. And so if you're serving up content that's boring and not memorable, there's no way someone's going to remember how to do those behaviors. Like, they haven't even caught it the first time, because it's, same old. And I see people sort of wanting this change and this different way of thinking. And it's sticking in certain places. I mean, it was funny because I served up something very different and contrary to one of my customers, and it was very much not. They're pretty buttoned up, even for a tech company. They're reasonably buttoned up. And I created kind of this funny sounding class that had a pink unicorn with it, and it was kind of goofy, but it definitely drew their attention. It was the course basically filled up in less than 20 minutes. It had a 50-person waiting list, and it was like the fastest they'd ever seen people sign up for things. So I think, like, if you build it, they'll come. And if you make it weird, they're like, what is this? I got to check this out. And it's that, some of the weird stuff rubs off, and then you can still have really deep conversations and just remember. And it's funny because even though I thought, like, okay, this is for the emerging manager and leader, and they might be, a millennial, whatever, they're in this age bracket, they've never managed others before. I had someone who was a very experienced leader say, like, hey, will you come talk to my team of, very much experienced, they each had 25 and above years of service in a tech company. And they're like, we're having a meeting. We need some stuff to sort of spark us and to make us think. And I went in with the cardboard cutouts and weird stuff that I bring to all my sessions. And these guys looked at me like, and it was a room full of like tech guys who had seen it all. And they would look in, and all of them just sort of turned and looked at me. They're like, what is going on here? And I'm like, we're going to get weird. But I explained why. I'm like, we're going to get weird because you're going to remember this. And like me coming in with like this, these cardboard cutouts of like lips in business suits and giant pineapple heads, like real weird stuff. But they were memory triggers. And we walk in, I put all this stuff up there, like, what in the God, what is happening? But then I explain, like, here's the thing, you're going to remember this, and we're going to have some good conversations today. And I'm going to anchor it with these wacky visuals. And sure enough, they're like, at first we thought you were nuts. And then we're like, okay, no, we'll give her a chance. And so part of it is then also bringing, like, it's not weirdness for weirdness sake, it's weirdness with a purpose to make you remember and to grow and develop. And so it was a funny experiment, because one of the people I was with on my team we were just laughing to each other like, all right, well, let's see how this goes. Like, this is a big bet. And we just sort of snickered afterwards. We're like, that was better than expected. They got it. Like, we even had like this funny head. And when the guys put the head on, and I was like, this is amazing. This is so, because people, I mean, humans just like to see something different, and novelty works to kind of get people's attention. So it was pretty entertaining. And if nothing else, I'm having a good time with this experiment, which I think is where I want to be right now.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, to me, the anchoring that you were creating as a result of that is pretty powerful. And that's when you and I were chatting off mic, and I said that's why on the Call Center Coach Virtual Leadership Academy that we have to develop those frontline leaders, I started mentioning something about senior leaders coming in and how it's, kind of transformed and changed. And that's what we try to do, is we try to switch it up, try to do things, although I think we need to get a little bit more wacky. So we're going to have some talk. All right. So when I
love those anchors, love them. Yeah, I love those anchors, and that's it. It makes a big difference.
It sure does. And I think one of the things when you start talking about neuroscience that's critically important, and you kind of have to think about it, is what I'm trying to grow, right? So think about it as, turning up the soil, I'm planting a seed, the whole cultivation and then the whole nurturing piece, and that you kind of have to think about that from a neuroscience perspective. You can't just get right into and say, hey, this is the fully grown thing. I mean, you have to actually bake things.
You do. And I think realizing that this all takes time, and a time investment, and taking the time and space to do this. And whether you're developing yourself, developing a team of people who are going to lead others, whether it's, it takes time. And I think that we're all in a rush all the time, and myself included. Like, I'm a fast mover. I'm kind of hyper. I like to get things done. I'm accomplishment oriented, like a lot of people I know. But part of it is that real intentional taking a step back and giving things time to marinate, to think about things. Your brain needs it. And I feel like right now, I've been trying to encourage a lot of people with COVID, and we've got some extra time here and there to like just take that time to reflect and to do things that, like hobbies, like even if it's a hobby that you have never tried before. Like, I'm doing a lot of drawing lately. Like, I am not an artist, but exposing yourself and doing things that are creative, that are tactical with your hands, that are different from what you normally do, stepping away from screens, doing puzzles, like just stuff to kind of get the juices flowing, to get yourself thinking and more reflective and innovative. It's a great time to do that, and to make that space to do that. I know I've been working at home. I'm either in front of clients or I'm at home. And so I've been working at home for a decade plus. And I noticed in that shift, people were literally filling their entire day with work and feeling more tired and more exhausted. And I'm like, oh, you haven't figured this out yet. Those of us who've been working from home don't actually work all day. Like, we go for a walk, we run an errand, we mix it up during the day, we exercise. Like, I am unabashed, and I tell anybody, like, I'm going out for a hike 2 hours a day. I have since COVID for sure, but like, I used to sort of hide that, like, oh, I'm going for a hike from noon to 2. And people are like, what? I'm like, I know, it's terrible. It's just, how am I not locked to a desk and a computer all day? I don't know. Like, to be really innovative, that balance is absolutely necessary. So I've been telling people, like, please don't work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. straight in front of your computer. You're going to wilt and die. Part of that, to be innovative, is to realize that we have ultradian rhythms, and you've got to follow those, and be really realistic in the fact that it takes time to come up with these good ideas, and you have to give yourself that time and that reflection space to do it.
As we spent time together, I started thinking about something I probably should have done when we first started chatting, when we approached the topic of neuroscience. And that is, a lot of people may have misunderstandings about what neuroscience is or isn't. And so I would love to get your definition and perspective on what is neuroscience.
I mean, it's fundamental, right? It's the study of the nervous system, and at the central part of it is your brain. And so I see a lot of people throwing around like neuroscience. Hey, we all know neuroscience. It's getting real popular, which is great, but also dangerous, because there's a lot of BS out there too. And so I like somebody made the mistake of saying I was a neuroscientist the other day, and I'm like, whoa, 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 no, 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 no. Like the scientific community, I think, like would poo-poo that. I'm not. I read articles, I curate, I understand the science behind it, and I look at neuroscience research in the context of leadership. And I think it's really helpful, but I also believe that it's not everything can be solved through it. And so it's essentially looking at it, not to get scared by it. I'm reading articles about rat brains. Like it's not like there's no mystery behind it. It's experiments. It's looking at the scientific method. It's looking for things that we can learn from replicated experiments, whether it's human brains, rat brains, behavioral experiments, and like trying to pull that science in to say, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for a leader in their behaviors and how they operate? And that's really it. And like the razzle dazzle, the twinkle, the neuroscience word is all over the place, which it kind of cracks me up. And I'm excited that people are learning about their brains and all these fun facts. Like I could go for days and read fun facts about books and fun things about our brains because the science has improved. The machinery to actually measure what's happening in our brains has improved drastically. Scientists are asking much more interesting questions. They're using different contexts because it used to just be like, for health and for disease prevention. And now it's like, oh, how can we use the science to apply it to different contexts, whether it's learning, whether it's business, whether it's education. Those are wonderful things in my book. But I also don't want people to get like either super turned off, because I've had people go like, oh, you're a science chick. Like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, that sounds I didn't grow up thinking like, oh, I'm going to really be science minded. Like, I'm a nerd and I took a path and now this stuff sounds really interesting. And it sounds really interesting in the context of work. And so if you can take some additional information from a space that, you know, is not your usual and apply it in a new way, that's innovation. So I'm really interested in it and wanted to go deep because I was like, okay, how is this useful for us day to day? So I want to caution people, like, learning how to read science is actually super helpful because you can debunk stuff that doesn't work, doesn't mean things, or like a sample size that's 12 people or 12 rat brains that people are then using to say, oh, this is, you know, the new awesome thing and this is how we should all react. And it's like, no, it's actually not. It's a small study. It doesn't matter. But I also hate the fact that scientists all just slice each other down, and like, if you can't replicate their studies, like, they vilify each other. It's kind of a weird space that I'm glad I'm not in. Because they kind of eat their young, and it's weird. It's like, no, I get it. Like, we need to have high standards, but like, we don't need to be inhuman about it. And so I've just really enjoyed sort of the opportunity to look and learn. And a good leader will kind of continuously learn through their life. And I've just been passionate about it because I think, and I can go deep in it. And it's funny because Kevin, when we were writing the book, he's like, I think you need to pull it up a layer or two because I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, you got full geek on that. And I was like, okay, all right, that's cool. He's like, people are not going to understand your, you know, superior gyrus and all that. I'm like, okay, maybe I will kind of raise it up a level so we don't have to get too technical. But like, it's useful. It's useful to know how we operate and how we work, because brain's most complicated thing in our universe. We all have one. Lucky us. Like, why not figure out how it works and how to use it better?
Well, as you know, talking about debunking a lot of this stuff is, you know, the whole social perspective of rocket science being extremely complicated. And I always tell this story about a colleague that was actually having a conversation with a rocket scientist and said, you know, my job's significantly more difficult than yours. And he was like, what do you mean? I'm a rocket scientist. And then she says, well, let me ask you this. If I know the wind and I know my thrust, if I know the gravitational pull, if I know all these things, I know within an inch or two where that rocket's going to land. He goes, that's exactly right. And she looks at him and says, try to do that with people.
True. That's totally true. Yeah, and people are weird and hard to figure out and do unexpected things. So you're 100% correct. It is much harder, I think, than rocket science. And I think that's profound, because it's realizing that we can then always get better and always get better in how we work with people, communicate, innovate. And that's, to me, that's exciting. And the whole world of neuroplasticity and knowing that our brains can kind of grow and grow and grow, and we can make new connections. Like that was one of the most exciting things that I'd ever heard in my life. And then I tested it. I was like, okay, all right, brain, if you're so smart, learn one of the Japanese alphabets, and then learn another one. Like, it's like, now I'm like, all right, I'm gonna just learn stuff to test it, to see if I can remember this stuff. And I mean, I can entertain myself with that until the cows come home. So and I think that's kind of a core competency of a nerd, like, oh, I'm going to go deep on this and see if it really works. So yeah, it's fun and complicated.
Well, and talk about that fun and complication piece, and in order to help us to persevere through that, we need some inspiration. And one of the things that we look at on the show are quotes to help us do that. So is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
So it's really funny because I think about when we were finishing the book, Kevin and I thought it was really important, and we both did, to end with sort of a good quote that would talk about sort of the fact that, life's a really great adventure. I mean, whether you're thinking about science, whether you're thinking about your leadership, you should make it into an adventure and just sort of have an adventurer's mindset. And to go back to my roots in learning how to teach English and poetry, and my love of nature and transcendental, sort of being out in the wilderness, which kind of comes full circle for me, like studying the transcendentals in university as an undergrad. Like I got real hippie and just wanted to be outside all day, and just nature was our teacher. And then coming back to it and realizing from a scientific lens, like, yes, nature is our teacher, and they were all onto something. So I kind of love the Thoreau quote around, going into the woods. And so I'm going to read it from the book because we finish with it. I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So that's one that sticks here. Kev and I argued which one, and I won out on that one because I was like, this is the quote that I think defines both of us for sure. Like, going out into the woods to learn and to grow and to develop, whether that's from a scientific standpoint or what nature has to offer us, and learning through tough, extreme adventures, or even not so extreme adventures.
Thanks for sharing that. And we oftentimes ask about a time where you've gotten over the hump in order to learn something. And I think you've already shared that when you talked about going and doing that training session with those tech executives. So thank you for doing that. But so what I want to know now is, when you start looking at, your own experimentation and where you're going, and, having this book with Kevin, and is that you probably have a lot of goals that are sitting in front of you, but could you share one of them with us?
It was interesting because I just sort of made a decision somewhat recently about Super Mega Boss, because it not that it was a hobby, but it was something that I wasn't sure where I wanted to take it. Like, how big do I want it to be? And I think that's a foundational question in understanding purpose for any leader. And I sort of had to revisit that and say, like, okay, here's where I'm at right now. Here's the stage of life that I'm at. What do I want to do here? Like, do I want to just sort of groom it into something that's lifestyle and niche and interesting, or do I want to grow it? And I made a decision to grow it, which comes with all kinds of scary entrepreneurial, like, oh, okay, I've made that decision. And you have to sort of make that anchor. And understand, okay, that I need that purpose, I need that vision to be able to execute against that and track my goals on it. And so it was kind of a funny conversation, because I actually had talked to a couple of people, and I said, I'm kind of in the midst of making this decision. And they're like, knowing you, I think we know what you're going to do. I was like, yeah, probably, but I still need to explore the potential and the possibility of I can go many different directions here. What do I want to do? It's like, no, I think that there's a lot to offer here, and I think that it's a fun experiment to run. Let's see how it goes. And so I was like, all right, let's blow it up. Let's make it cool and big, and see where we can take it. So that's one of the things that you have to check in with yourself and what you want. And I think it's an important thing for everyone to think about their purpose. And so I was like, okay, I think right now in my phase of life in my career, like, my purpose is to help people who are growing and developing in the weird world of managing others.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Amy, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions. And your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Amy Posey, are you ready to hoe down?
I am.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I think for most of us, it's the negative voice in our head. We got to shut that person up because they're not really our friend. We wouldn't say the things that come out of our head to other people, but we say it to ourselves, and that's a bad thing. So you got to turn that voice, and as corny as it sounds, like you got to start being positive with yourself first, because naturally that thing wants to keep you alive. It's well intended, but you don't have to listen to it all the time.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Be more emotionally intelligent, and I think that's a good one. And it's, if you can capture and harness your emotions for positive outcome, you're going to be a better leader.
And what is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I'm a weirdo. And that's it. Like I've been a weirdo, and I have worked really hard to be my authentic self after many years ago being told I shouldn't be my authentic self. And I threw that advice out the window, and it seems to serve me well, and I'm having a good time.
And what is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
Best tools. I keep a very detailed to-do list and checklist, and I use Microsoft To Do, believe it or not. And it's one of the things that just keeps me on track day to day, because that's the thing that I think I need the most help in. So just tracking the to-dos.
And what would be one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre.
I'm gonna say. Get back to looking at, other than my book, outside, read some poetry, read yourself some Walt Whitman, get yourself into nature, kind of expose yourself to something you maybe haven't read since high school. Give it another try, because there's some good stuff in Song of Myself. That's a good one.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you'll find links to that and other bonus information, and a link to Amy's book that she co-authored with Kevin Vallely called Wild Success, 7 Key Lessons Business Leaders Can Learn from Extreme Adventurers, on her show notes pages as well, which you can find at fastleader.net/Amy Posey. Okay, Amy, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age 25. You can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Honestly, it'd be the neuroscience. I learned it a little later in life, and I wish I had it in the beginning of my career to be able to work with people even more effectively and be able to give them reasons why they behave the way they do, versus just saying, like, do it this way because I told you so, and that's what a good habit is. It gives people science and a reason to try something and experiment with how they operate. So I think I would definitely put that in my toolkit as a 25-year-old.
Amy, I had fun with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Absolutely. So supermegaboss.com is where I'm doing fun and weird stuff today. And amyposey.com. They can also follow me on Instagram at supermegaboss. There's some good stuff there, or hit me up on LinkedIn and we can connect.
Amy Posey, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.